All right, today we're going to get into something a little different. This isn't just about physics. We're talking about the raw, human stories behind the science. We're going to explore the terrifying power of the atom, but through the eyes of the people who actually came face to face with its invisible fire. You see, this is a force that can give us incredible power, or it can be unleashed with consequences that are just catastrophic. And these stories, they're not just footnotes in a history book. They are some serious cautionary tales written in that invisible fire.
You gotta love the way the physicist Richard Feynman put things. He used this incredible phrase, tickling the tail of a sleeping dragon, to describe what his colleagues were doing. I mean, think about it. These were pioneers, right at the absolute edge of what we knew, doing these incredibly delicate experiments. They were trying to find that exact point where a stable element just erupts into a self-sustaining nuclear reaction. They were quite literally poking at a power they were only just starting to wrap their heads around.
Okay, so what is this criticality they were all chasing? What does that even mean? Well, imagine trying to balance a needle on its very tip. It's possible, right? But the absolute slightest breeze, the tiniest nudge, and it all comes crashing down. Nuclear criticality is basically the atomic version of that. It's the precise razor's edge moment when a chunk of radioactive material, something like plutonium, has just enough mass and just the right shape to kick off a chain reaction all by itself. It's the tipping point between being a boring old piece of metal and an uncontrolled bomb. And that pursuit of this incredibly delicate balance, well, that's where our story really kicks off. We're talking about the brilliant scientists who became the accidental pioneers and, tragically, the very first victims of this new atomic age. So let's meet our first two key figures, Harry Daghlian and Louis Slotin. Both were incredibly gifted physicists, both working on the top-secret Manhattan Project. And here's the wild part. Both of them, less than a year apart, had a deadly run-in with the exact same 6-kilogram sphere of plutonium, a piece of metal that would later earn a truly chilling nickname, the Demon Core. So picture this. It's August 21st, 1945. Harry Daghlian is in the lab, carefully stacking these tungsten carbide bricks around the core. Now think of these bricks like mirrors, but for neutrons. Their job is to bounce any stray neutrons back into the plutonium, kind of nudging it closer and closer to going critical. He knew he was right on the edge, but as he was moving that very last brick, he fumbled. The brick slipped right out of his hand and fell directly onto the core. Boom! Instantaneously, the whole thing went critical. He reacted on pure instinct, knocking the brick away, but it was far too late. He just absorbed a massive and fatal dose of radiation. Now get this. It's less than a year later, and another physicist, Louis Slotin, is performing a similar experiment with the very same Demon Core. But Slotin, well, he had a reputation for being a bit of a cowboy, a bit of a showman. Instead of using the proper, safe spacers to keep these two halves of a beryllium reflector separated, what does he use? The tip of a plain old flathead screwdriver. Can you believe that? And of course, with 7 other scientists watching, it happened. The screwdriver slipped, and the beryllium sphere snapped shut around the core. In a flash, the room just lit up with this haunting blue glow. That's the air itself being ionized by the radiation. And a wave of heat washed over everybody. Slotin got blasted with 21 sieverts of radiation. Now remember Daghlian? He died from a dose of about 5 sieverts. Slotin took more than 4 times that. But even in that split second, knowing what had just happened, his instincts took over. He ripped the spheres apart with his bare hands, stopping the reaction. He knew he was a dead man, but he saved every single other person in that room. He died an absolutely agonizing death 9 days later. So those lab accidents, they are absolutely terrifying. But the scale of these events was about to get a whole lot bigger. We're moving from individual mistakes in a lab to massive disasters where the choice was between your own certain death and an even greater catastrophe for everyone else. This is the price of duty. We all know the name Chernobyl. April 26, 1986, a date burned into history. But what a lot of people don't know is that after that first catastrophic explosion, an even worse one was brewing. The molten nuclear core from the reactor was literally melting through the concrete floor, heading straight for these huge pools of cooling water down below. If that molten core hit the water, it would have caused a steam explosion so massive, it would have basically vaporized the other 3 reactors and poisoned a huge chunk of Europe for centuries. Someone had to go down there, into the flooded, lethally radioactive basement, and manually turn the valves. And engineer Alexander Levchenko did it. He waded through that poison water, not once, but 3 times over 2 days. He knew exactly what he was doing, and he died less than 2 weeks later. Okay, Now let's take that same level of crisis, that same impossible choice, and let's put it on a submarine. You're trapped in a metal tube deep under the ocean. You can't escape, and the nuclear reactor just a few feet away is actively melting down. What do you do?
This wasn't a drill. On the Soviet sub K-19, on July 4, 1961, a critical coolant pipe burst. Temperatures were skyrocketing. A meltdown wasn't just possible, it was happening. So a team led by Officer Boris Korolov volunteered for what they all knew was a suicide mission. And when they got into the reactor compartment, they saw it. That same horrible blue glow we heard about earlier, coming from the damaged pipes. For hours, they worked in these lethal conditions, jury-rigging a new, makeshift cooling system. They did it. They saved the ship. But the cost was immense. Korolov was dead in 6 days, and because of Cold War secrecy, this story of incredible bravery was kept under wraps for decades.
Okay, so all the stories we've heard so far, they have a terribly predictable ending, right? Massive exposure, horrific sickness, and then death. But this last case, this one breaks all the rules. This is the story of the impossible survivor.
Okay, look at this. On the left, that's Louis Slotin's fatal dose, 21 sieverts, an amount that just dissolved his body from the inside out in 9 days. And then, look at the bar on the right. That's Anatoli Bugorski. And no, that is not a mistake on the chart. That's over 2,000 sieverts. A dose that shouldn't just be fatal, it should be, well, scientifically, it's impossible to survive.
So how in the world did this happen? Bugorski was a physicist, and he was working on this massive particle accelerator in the Soviet Union. He was leaning into the machine to check on something that wasn't working right, and at that exact moment, a safety lock failed. For just a fraction of a second, his head was right in the path of the main proton beam. The weird thing is, he said he didn't feel any pain at all. What he did see was a flash brighter than 1,000 suns. That beam shot into the back of his head, straight through his brain and his middle ear, and exited out through his nose. And the single most astonishing part of this entire story? He survived. What happened next is it's a total medical paradox. The left side of his face swelled up like a balloon, and the skin peeled away, but he didn't die. His brain, his intelligence, totally fine. He actually went on and finished his PhD. Now, he didn't walk away completely unscathed, of course. He lost all hearing in one ear, the left side of his face was paralyzed, and he started having occasional seizures. But the man lived. In fact, he is still alive today. So what's the theory here? Well, it seems that because the beam was so incredibly focused, almost like a microscopic needle, it just drilled a tiny path of destruction through the cells. It didn't cause that massive systemic shutdown you get from whole-body radiation. So from the guys tickling the dragon's tail in the lab, to the heroes who walked into certain death, to the man who survived the unsurvivable, what do we take away from all this? Is Bugorski's story some kind of medical miracle, a testament to how tough the human body can be? Or is it just a terrifying reminder that we're playing with a fundamental force of nature that, when it comes right down to it, is still completely and utterly unpredictable?